Welcome to New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.
What's up, everybody? Dexter, Henry, Bryan, Fonseca here. First time we're doing this. New York Got Game Knicks Weekly Live. First time that we are doing it after a Knicks game. This was a victory, so we don't have to be sad. Hopefully everybody's having a fantastic Black Friday. Hopefully everybody had a fantastic Thanksgiving holiday. Bryan, how was your Thanksgiving holiday? I feel like I kind of ate too much, but I'm still not really sure. I ate enough. I'll say that.
I ate enough also. I also have a lot of leftovers. So
Same.
which I'm happy about because that means I don't have to cook for a couple of days. I don't have to wash dishes for a couple of days. So I'll take that gladly. And you knowing me as long as you have, you know what I ate. You know what I had.
I do know. I know exactly what you the plate was very Puerto Rican flavored. Let's put it like that. There you go. as my plate had a little bit of Caribbean flavor. I did do some cooking. I did make some curry goat. Came out good as usual. So I can't complain about that. So it is good. Thank you to everybody joining us, watching on Twitter, watching on YouTube. We appreciate you. We're gonna get right into stuff because the Knicks, they get a win. They end the road trip, 5-game road trip. Feels like they haven't been at home in a long time. It's been since the middle of November. They're just going to get back home. But the Knicks, they escaped Charlotte with a 95-94 win on
99-98.
Excuse me, 99-98. My bad on the score. I'm sorry. I had to shorten the score. 99-98 win. It was a 1-point win there. I forgot about the 3-pointer that happened at the end and the free throws that Jalen Brunson hit at the end. But a 99-98 win on on Friday for the Knickerbockers. I'm trying to get ahead through the weekend already. This was a game, Bryan, where the Knicks, for the second straight game, came out really, I'll say, sluggish. And I get this is an early start, 12 o'clock tip. The offense did not look great in this one. Also, the defensive intensity hadn't been there, but they figured it out, right? They got to win. I already see somebody in the chat. Shout out to Brian Jordan watching on YouTube. Said a win is a win. He is right about that. I do not disagree with you on any of that. What were your thoughts on what we saw from the Knicks? Sluggish start, turning the ball over, not shooting well. We'll get into some other concerns that people may have about the Knicks right now. But what were your thoughts on this win that they got over Charlotte? Which you texted me. This was an ugly game. It was ugly as hell. It was ugly. What were your thoughts on this game?
It was Charlotte Hornets basketball. And if you've been watching the Charlotte Hornets at all, there are probably Knicks fans who are watching this or are going to see this later on that haven't seen the Hornets all year. This is kind of how their games have gone. They have played to the most unders in the NBA this season, 12 unders of their now 19 games. And the total for this was low as well. So just from a basketball standpoint, like we were talking about this last week or the week before, and the road trip coming up, because this has been a big focus, obviously, in Knicks world right now. And what I was saying was like, hey, Charlotte being the last game is not necessarily a walkover. And we were previewing the entire road trip, talking about could they go 4-1, could they go 3-2? And yes, while the Knicks are a better team than Charlotte, much better considering that Mark Williams has not played this season. Nick Richards, their backup center, is out. So Moussa Diabate has been starting. Grant Williams actually was, and he's torn his ACL. He's out. And then LaMelo Ball is injured and didn't play because of calf soreness. So Charlotte was very shorthanded for this game. And still, and it didn't feel like they were going to win to me after they were leading after 3 quarters. But still, they were in this and made it a game despite really leaning on, TJ Saloon, their first round pick, and Josh Green and Brandon Miller, who is supposed to be like next, so to speak, right? He's struggled a little bit this year, but with his efficiency tonight. But if you're the Knicks, like who else are you going to really guard that heavily on this team, right? So I think they did a good job on him, all things considered. But this wasn't going to be an easy one. But to Brian Jordan's comment, yes, a win is a win. You'll take it and move on. The Hornets, they kind of play uglier when LaMelo Ball is not there. And they don't score a lot of points, but they can really drag you into the mud for whatever reason. That's kind of what they've been doing this year. And I'm not sure if that's how they want to play necessarily, but it almost worked out today. And the Knicks really had to go out and get this win in a way that I don't know if people expected or wanted that, given that Jalen Brunson had to play a lot, given that they played 8 guys, and they didn't have to go deep into the rotation again. And it was in Charlotte. So.
Yeah, I mean, all 5 starters played over 37 minutes or more, right? Not what you probably want as a Knicks fan in terms of playing in Charlotte. We'll get into some of the other starters that struggled, but I'm with Brian Jordan on this. A win is a win, and look, there's going to be nights in the league where you don't have your best. You don't shoot the ball as great, or you don't play defense. Shooting an offense, especially with this team as good as they've been offensively, is not going to concern me. There were going to be some games where they just don't shoot the ball as well. Defense is where I'll be a little bit concerned. We'll get into that a little bit later. But overall, when you look at this road trip, right, 3-2, we talked about this before the trip started. We had Steph and Bondi on with us, and we thought they could finish 4-1. I think Steph had picked that too. The Knicks legitimately could have gone 4-1 on this trip had they played better in one half of these games. I'll put Dallas or Utah, right? This is the 2 losses on this trip. Both of those games, they did not bring out the energy, but they looked good in 2 wins. They looked fantastic offensively against Denver. They looked really good against Utah as well, too. We had that game right before we did our last live stream. Are you disappointed they didn't go 4-1? I think maybe the one that's more disappointing might be that Utah game. They felt like they just walked through that game last Saturday. Or it's like, look, it's a long trip, some weird start times. You had a 3:00 start Utah time last Saturday. You had the 12 p.m. start today on Black Friday. Do you just look at this as like, look, you finished the road trip above 500. You're 6-6 on the season on the road. Now you're coming back home for a 4-game homestand, which we'll get into later as well. But are you just happy they finished at 3-2, or are you a little disappointed they couldn't have gone 4-1?
Honestly, it's hard to go 4-1 in this league on road trips, like kind of regardless of opponent, right? And then in just looking at it game by game, you didn't have any back to backs, so there wasn't that. But
It's
you
true.
did have I feel like there may have been a missed opportunity with Utah, and then when you look at the Dallas one, like I don't want to overlook that one. That wasn't great. Luka Doncic didn't play.
Yep.
And Dallas is still a good team without him. Najee Marshall's been on a tear without Luka Doncic there. Quentin Grimes came back from injury, I believe, for that game. And obviously you still have Kyrie Irving and, your mostly normal cast of characters there. So that game, that was one where they came out really flat. They came out probably just as flat in this game, but they were playing, the Hornets without the collection of guys that I already mentioned. So this is a drop off in competition. It didn't end up killing them. It almost did, because we would have been talking about we would have a much different conversation if they went out and lost this game. But going into the fourth quarter, it was like, I mean, you have Jalen Brunson as your closer. You have karl-Anthony Towns, who, he wasn't amazing tonight, but Charlotte only has one option here with Brandon Miller, with all due respect, unless you're going to just find open shooters, which they did to some success. So to me, it's like the energy wasn't quite there. The 5th game in a 5-game road trip is always very difficult in this league too. And now that they go back home, it's kind of the same discussion that we've been having. And now we're about 20 games in. Now we're about a quarter of the way through the season. So it's like, okay, now you're going to be home for a while. There's a big homestand, which is going to be a big point of emphasis for us today. And in this homestand, can you actually get 3 out of 4 or whatever the case may be, maybe even all 4? Because you have, I would say, 3 very winnable games on this schedule. And I would say another one is also winnable. Just that one in particular is probably not going to be easy because it's the Orlando Magic. And then after that, you have another short road trip. But, you have a lot of winnable games coming up on the schedule that you should be able to take care of business. So I wouldn't say being disappointed by this road trip is a thing for me, because ultimately they did get the job done in 3 out of 5. And it's hard to win in this league. But they did come out lethargic in the last 2 games of the road trip. And I want to see if that's something that's just specific to this road trip, or if that's going to transfer over to the homestand that we're about to embark on.
Yeah, and I think what you're also going to hear from some of the fans, and fans, let us know what you're thinking. Please put your comments in the chat on YouTube, wherever you're watching. We will answer any questions, any comments that you have. I think that one of the things fans are going to say when you look at the energy level is, it's going to come back to the minutes, right? And the minutes that we're seeing some of the starters play, I was told already today, 37 minutes for at least for all of the starters today. And this stuff isn't sustainable. Tom Thibodeau only playing 3 guys off the bench. Jericho Sims only played 8 minutes in this contest. Cameron Payne, 11. Deuce McBride, 27. And we'll get into McBride now. I want to talk about McBride's 27 minutes because it was an important 27 minutes. He goes 5 of 9 from the field, 2 of 5 from downtown, 14 points. He's a +4 on the night. But what's very interesting is Deuce McBride, he closes the game over Mikal Bridges. And I'm just going to talk about offense here, folks. I'm just talking about offense. 3 of 10 from the field, 1 of 4 downtown. He did hit an above the break 3 today. That was good. -14 on the floor, 8 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals. Bridges, we'll touch on the shooting later here when we do our real or not segment. But yo, the energy from him, I'm just not seeing it. I've been watching this all season long. He's not fighting over screens. He's falling away on a shot on offense. The defensive energy isn't there.
Yeah.
I'm getting to the point, and this is where I'm with you. Well, before I get to that, what did you make of the fact that Thibs, which I thought was the right move, closed with Deuce over Bridges here, who clearly didn't have it on either end of the court? What did you make of him closing with Deuce in this one?
Well, from I guess a business standpoint, if I may start there, Mikal Bridges doesn't have his extension yet, so I don't feel obligated to close with him every game if he doesn't have it. You know, if I'm the Knicks, if I'm top of the middle. I'm sure he's not even looking at it from that perspective. He just it's a more simplified version of, hey, he's not playing particularly well. Deuce has earned the minutes, and in this particular matchup, like Deuce McBride just works. It just works because Charlotte guards not going to really stop anybody defensively, with all due respect. But Mikal Bridges, like, listen, they traded what they traded for him, but there's still not a long-term obligation to him, and he has to be playing for a new contract. And to this point, like, yeah, you're kind of not really excited about what he's given you so far this year. The defense is the big thing for me because you talked about the energy. He had a reputation as almost like a defensive stopper, like in Phoenix. I wouldn't call him that necessarily, but he was still a very strong wing defender who you could put him on some of the elite wings and he could at least make their lives hard, which is about all you can ask in this league, given how much offensive players get away with and given how the game is officiated nowadays. And he was that dude from a defensive standpoint, an all defense level player in Phoenix. And then when he went to Brooklyn, some of that slipped a little bit because, you know, it's hard to be an elite two-way player in this league. He had to elevate offensively. I feel like that took away from some of his defense to some degree. And also the team around him wasn't as good. And now here it's like you have a better defensive setup just from the standpoint of, and we talk about the Knicks defensive struggles, but you at least have OG Anunoby. Like, he's never played with a wing who can defend like OG Anunoby. And I don't really have many issues with the way OG's played so far, which we've talked about.
He's been tremendous. Outside the last 2 games, he's been tremendous. Yeah,
like by and large, like, you know, and the start was maybe slightly slow for some people, especially from a scoring standpoint. But no, OG Anunoby, like, you're happy with, like, you're getting what you paid for in OG Anunoby. With Mikal Bridges, you're ultimately not. That's kind of where we are, if I could just like boil it down to that. OG Anunoby is giving you what you paid for. Karl-Anthony Towns to this point is giving you what you paid for. Jalen Brunson has been giving you what you paid for since you paid for it. And Mikal Bridges, we're not quite there yet.
No, and it's I felt like through preseason, through the start of this regular season, when he was struggling with the shot, I was like, I'm not that worried. The worry level is changing.
And it looked awful. The change was also jarring, like the actual change of the form, for example.
Yeah,
which didn't help.
I still am less worried about his offense than I am his defense, right? Like, if I had to rank the two, the defense is still, because that's kind of what you were known for, being a good 3-and-D player. Now, Mikal is shooting still well from the corners. He can't buy an above the break 3. He hit 1 today, which was nice to see, but he can't buy one. And I don't know what's going on there. I'm wondering if there's a couple things going on. Starting to get in his head. He's thinking about the extension. You brought it up, but he's thinking about it, right? And so he's pressing. Like, there's a human element to this stuff. He knows that the team gave up 5 first-round picks for him, right? He wanted to come over. He's playing with his boys. And I wonder if some of that pressure is there for him. I do think there's a point he will figure this out. I just think he's too talented of a player not to figure this out. So I don't think it is, but is it at the point where it's starting to hurt the team? I'm gonna say yes, slightly, because to your point, OG Anunoby's has had a fantastic borderline all-star level season. And if you have nights like the last two nights where he's been your third option and probably your most consistent Knick this season, when he doesn't have it like he's had it the last two nights, which was bound to happen for OG at some point, he didn't step up. You got to give Tom Thibodeau credit, though. Bridges was terrible in this game. Terrible. Deuce McBride was not. And he went with the guy who was playing better. I always like to see that. You got to have a feel, got to have a pulse for your team. He went with the dude who was playing better. I think it's the right move. I think it's also a wake-up call to Bridges. You got to get your act together. And I'm always here for the accountability. You know what I mean? So, like, you've got to get your act together. And at some point, he's going to have to do that. Right now, he's not looking good. I think the problem for me, Brian, is the lack of effort we're seeing on defense, particularly going over screens.
He's dying on screens.
He's dying on screens. I see
like it's that, and then when you also look at and before this game, like even before this outing, which is one of his worst of the season so far, his advanced numbers are also capturing like some slippage here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't not to say that it's permanent or whatever the case may be, but like win shares per 48 is usually a decent metric to determine like who's impactful on an NBA team, who isn't, and he has the lowest number of his career, which is probably worse after this game, right? Defensive box plus minus for somebody who's supposed to be reputed to be an elite level defender, the worst of his career. And it's also in the negative. It was minus 1.8
which
before
he has, like,
this game.
never been
Right.
in his career.
Right. Like last year it was in a negative, but you could attribute that to the Nets were bad.
Right.
And everybody was kind of affected, or whatever the case may be. Box plus minus, worst of his career. VORP, worst of his career. Like all these different things. And then when you look at some of the offensive numbers, like his true shooting percentage is the worst of his career. His efficiency, generally speaking, is one of the worst of his career.
Which is
everything is
shocking
down. Everything is down.
See, that part of me, it's not as much a struggle from threes as much as the efficiency you mentioned, like the true shooting percentage. Because he was for a time killing in the mid-range, but if you watch the end of this road trip, he wasn't even doing that. And that's where you're like, okay, I don't know if this is getting in this guy's head at all whatsoever. We have James Morrison checking in here. He says Bridges plays like a lazy player. Well, hey, there's no effort over them screens right now. I'll say that. Like, I don't think he's lazy. I'm not saying that. I'm just not seeing the effort, right? I'm not seeing that here. Thank you for checking in, James. We also have Brian Jordan, who checked in before. He said he's watching from Hoop Fest in Texas. Okay, good, big high school tournament. My daughter, Grace Knox, number 6 in the national class of 2025, made LSU the number 1 recruiting class in the nation. All the top high school stars are here. Bockers for life. Hashtag.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Jordan, I want to let you know that I see what you're doing right here. You are a proud dad. You're out here throwing a little flex. Your daughter is part of one of the best recruiting classes in the nation, which means she can hoop. LSU obviously is a tremendous school. We just want to send her love and wish her well in her collegiate basketball journey. But go ahead, proud papa. You go out and flex with your daughter out there playing well. Nothing wrong with that.
Another thing about Mikal Bridges.
Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Another thing about Mikal Bridges, real quick. Just like I like him as a player, so I still think this is, like, to put a bow on this. Give it time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fit can show up there, but so far it's a rough start. I think it's a conversation worth monitoring, and we can resume maybe after another 10 or so games or whatever the case may be, because it takes time to just build chemistry in this league. Maybe he hasn't found his footing yet, but so far it just hasn't looked great. And you've seen more highlights from other players. You've seen more things that sort of add up with the fit, at least between Brunson and Anunoby. Towns, Deuce McBride is doing what he does. Campaign has even had some really good games off the bench this season. So, yeah. I mean, you just need to see more from Mikal Bridges at this point.
I think so. I mean, I get it. We're at this point. It's a 19-game sample. This is a guy who's one of the Iron Men in the league. Again, I think he figures it out. I wonder how much of it is the pressure. And there's a lot of expectations on this team. They clearly have things they need to be better at defensively. It's really funny because the Knicks are 11-8, and I don't think a lot of us, whether it's in media, whether it's fans, don't really know what to make of this team right now. You saw this road trip is kind of the microcosm of the season in a way, right? You've seen flashes of brilliance on, extreme elite level offense, and then subpar defense against sometimes either lower echelon teams or teams without their star players, or sometimes like today, a combination of both.
Both, right?
Right. So that's the thing where you're like, now I wonder as this team gets a little more confident, Brian, do we see them? Because I think what you've seen for the Knicks is they've gotten up for the good teams, but they also have to be able to put away bad teams as well, too. Not just today. There's going to be some games through the year where you play a bad team like Charlotte and you don't have it, and you got to find a way to win, and they did. You got to give them credit for that. But you also would like to see, I'm sure fans would like to see this too, them just sort of put that team away, make it a nice, easy win, and don't play with your food. That's what they'd like to see. But we'll see. Now, one of the things, to me, I think that's a big takeaway in this road trip that you got to look at, and particularly the last two games, as we talked about, these slow offensive starts. Man, they have been slow on the offensive starts. They've just not shot the ball well. They haven't taken care of the ball. It's been really bad in terms of that. Are you concerned about that, Brian? Or for you, is this a case of like, hey, this was 2 bad games? Are you starting to see maybe a little bit of a trend with these slow offensive starts, and you need to see them get off to better starts with that than we've seen in the last 2 games against Dallas and Charlotte?
Until the defense gets better, you can't really afford to
Yeah.
have these
Yeah.
like that. That's the real
Right.
piece of this. You can't really afford to have these slow defensive starts, offensive starts rather, because then what happens is the Dallas game, where when the offense sort of gets in a rhythm later on, and not even in like the rhythm that they had, earlier in the trip, but like against Denver, for example. But when you don't start off hot, like that puts more pressure on your defense, which has been bottom half of the league this year. That's being generous, actually. They're closer to the bottom 5 now by the metrics. It'll improve after this game because Charlotte didn't really have anybody and only put up 98 points and were shooting very inefficiently, and it made the Knicks defense look better. But that's really the thing. It's like when your offense is so great and you get off to the slow starts. This would happen to Indiana last year, for example. Like Indiana had the best offense in the NBA, and when they would get off to a slow start, it's like, all right, now you're putting the onus on the offense to sort of overcompensate because you can't get stops on defense. It's the same thing in football. It's like in football, if you have a great offense and you're down 14-0 because the other team had the ball first and scored, and then you had a 3 and out, and then they scored again, and then it's like, all right, you can't get stops. Like you have to figure out ways to sort of create those opportunities on defense when your defense isn't that good, and then your offense has to continually march down the field and get these points. Like the Knicks are shooting themselves in the foot with the slow starts. We'll see if it continues. Maybe at home, it won't be as big of an issue on this trip. That's going to be a little more favorable to them just from a matchup standpoint. But I think that's something to monitor because like you can't, especially late in the year, and if the defense never improves enough, like if your defense is going to be in the bottom 10 all year, for example, like, yeah, you can't really afford to have these slow offensive starts in playoff games, considering that your defense has struggled all year. And by that point, we're going to have film on everybody, and everyone's going to know, all right, we're going to do this to karl-Anthony Towns. We're going to do this on switches. We're going to do this to attack Jalen Brunson. We could screen Mikal Bridges here, and then he won't fight over it. Like all these different things you could sort of like measure when it comes to postseason time. So yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on the offense to overcompensate, and it could be a little worrisome. We'll see. It's still November, about to be December, but that's something that they cannot afford to deal with in the playoffs because it'll lose them a series.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's now I'm still a believer. Can the Knicks defense trend in the right direction that they can get up somewhere between 10 to 15 in the league? Yeah, I believe they have the talent to do that. They've got a lot of work to get there with the sample size that we've seen, but they do have the talent to do that. But you're right. They're just not good enough defensively right now to be able to overcome slow offensive starts and where they get themselves in double-digit deficits. You get yourself in that kind of hole. yes, they have the offensive firepower to give you a 12-0 run, to give you a 17-0 run. But the problem with when you get those runs and trying to sustain it and then take the lead, you got to string together stops. And they haven't shown me yet the ability to do that in the way that we've seen from the Knicks, I would say, over the last couple of years. Now, if you're a fan, maybe you want to bank on the fact that Tom Thibodeau teams, we've seen sometimes slow start defensively and they'll pick it up. We have seen this in the past before. This is absolutely true. But look, Knicks, they got to get better. I think you can work. I'm not worried per se looking at this, evaluating this team about the slow offensive starts the last couple of games because they'll probably do some bad shooting nights. But you gotta the defensive energy to come out. I said that last week when we talked about after Phoenix. Everybody raved about the offense in that game, but for me, it was the defensive energy they came out with to start the game too that also helped them. I think in all their wins on this trip, same thing in Denver, except for this one today, they came out with good defensive energy. Now they had better defensive energy in the fourth quarter today, but also, no shade to Charlotte. They weren't like really guarding anybody that like of note that they had to really worry about on that end. You know what I mean? But it is what it is. All right, so the Knicks finish up this road trip 3-2, right? And then we got to look at their next 4 games. 4 games at home, homestands for the Knicks. They got the Pelicans on Sunday at the Garden, Sunday night. Then Tuesday, and this is a huge game, folks. For people who don't care about the NBA Cup, Knicks versus Magic. This is to win the group. Whoever wins this game will win the group. Both teams are 3-0 in group play. Whoever wins this game will win the group. They'll have the head-to-head tiebreaker. So you're getting a game for the group, which is, I think, pretty cool. Knicks have it at home. That's pretty nice for them. It's a TNT game, national TV game. So the league is happy about that. Fine. Then you see Charlotte again next Thursday, December 5th. We will be doing Knicks Weekly Live next week on Wednesday. Before that. Because there's a Thursday game. So we'll do it before that. And then Saturday, they've got the Pistons. These are all winnable games. 3 of these games, you were kind of alluding to this before, against teams below 500. 1 team is above 500. That's the Orlando Magic. These are very winnable games. And then obviously there's room in the schedule after that because we'll have to see how the quarterfinals and semifinals and things play out. But then the Knicks after that are on the road at Toronto, 10 days later at Minnesota, at New Orleans. So this is not, when you look at this month, this is also a month where they could feast. Like if you just look ahead. However, that's the thing with looking at the schedule. You can always be like, oh, they should do this, they should do that. But then you lose a game here you didn't think you were going to lose. You win a game that you didn't think you were going to win. These are how these things go. When you look at this homestand, how imperative is it that they go at least 3-1? I think there's a legit chance they could go 4-0, Brian, but how imperative is it that they at least go 3-1 here?
Yeah, and it's worth noting that with New Orleans in particular, because this is where this starts. Trey Murphy has returned from injury, but he's kind of been in and out. Like he hurt his knee again, and he's questionable to play today as we're talking right now. So we'll see if he's going to be available to play in that game. Brandon Ingram is also questionable. Like this team has just been lit up by injuries, but DeJounte Murray is back, and that's like he's had some success against the Knicks before. So like that's not a small thing, and we'll see how this goes with the rest of the roster because Zion Williamson is out and is going to be out for a while. Don't expect to see him in that game. But with New Orleans, it's just a cycle of guys that may or may not be healthy. With Orlando, obviously, they're still missing Paolo Banchero, but they're still 3rd in the Eastern Conference right now. Like the defense is still translated. Like they've been able to find, they've given Anthony Black some minutes, for example. They've been able to fill with Jonathan Isaac, who's obviously elite defensively. And Orlando's just gotten it done, really. Like plain and simple. That's the game for me, obviously, of this homestand. Like that's the one that's circled. That's the one that's playing for, if you're watching the standings this early, like just Eastern Conference positioning. Orlando projects to be one of the best teams in the East and has been. Their over-under got really high before the season started. It was nearing 50 at one point. And Orlando was the 5 seed last year. And usually young teams who overachieve Like, they can get better. So there's that one's going to be a tough one because we also know how Orlando could defend even without Paolo Banchero. And then, Charlotte's going to be back, but hey, LaMelo Ball might play in that game. So we'll see. And then Detroit is another team like Charlotte. They play hard. They're not overwhelming with talent necessarily. They are pretty talented, but they're not very good, but they play hard. Like, so these aren't gimmies. Like I said, Charlotte wasn't a gimme. These aren't gimmies. They should go 3-1. I would tell you right now, they will be favored to win all four in sports books and all these different things. But you're looking at, if you're the Knicks, like 3-1, 4-0, like that's the goal. Really 4-0. But I mean, if they lost one, you'd probably be like, depending on how and what and whatever the case may be. But 4-0 should be on the table.
4 should be on the table. Would have them in a nice spot. Would have them 7 games over 500 with the Knicks. I think Knicks fans would feel pretty good at that point. You'd be at the 23 game mark. You're right around that mark where I like to start judging team, that 25 game mark. By the time this NBA Cup is over, when the Knicks go on that road trip, when they're out in Minneapolis, when they're down in New Orleans, that's where I'm really looking at what this team is. Are we seeing some things trending better with the defense? Has Mikal Bridges' shooting got better? How close is Mitchell Robinson to returning? Is Precious Achiuwa back? That's something to also keep your eye on through this homestand. Deuce McBride comes back. Can Precious Achiuwa come back and contribute? Hearing that he's close, it wouldn't shock me if you saw him back during this homestand. I don't know which game it would be, but it doesn't sound like it'll be Sunday. Don't know if it'll be Tuesday. Maybe it's later in the homestand, Detroit or Charlotte, but we'll see how that goes. So, this is an important one for the Knicks. I think it's important to get this month started off right. So I was just also looking through the rest of their schedule for the month. Yeah, I'm being honest, man. Just looking at the schedule, this is a month where the Knicks could really eat. Like, they have a bunch of teams below 500. The only teams on their schedule right now that are above 500, they play Orlando twice this month. And San Antonio, I believe, is right at 500. And Minnesota is right there around there too. So there's not really any of the dominant contenders here. So the Knicks, this is one they can feast. If this is a month they could really get 10 games above 500 if they play good basketball, but you have to do that. So let's see what they could do. Let us know what you think about the Knicks on their upcoming homestand, 4-game homestand at MSG. How you feeling about the team right now? 11-8 on the season, 6-6 on the road. They played a lot of road games now to get some home cooking, and we'll see how that goes. All right, we're going to close out today with what we do all the time, Real or Not, our little segment we like to do. Remember, next week's episode, that'll be December 4th, Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. So we'll be on for that at that time. That'll be between the Orlando game, so we'll react a little bit to that, and also previewing the Hornets game coming up next Thursday. So we'll be sandwiched between then. So we'll have a lot to talk about. We'll have 2 games to talk about, 2 games to preview towards the end of the week. So do that. Also, new episode of New York Got Game coming out this Monday. We'll have a good one. We're going to talk about the Knicks and the Nets. The Nets, who've been surprising in winning 8 games. I don't think a lot of people had that on their bingo card at this point. By Thanksgiving, the Nets would have 8 wins. You might have thought they had 8 wins by Christmas, not by Thanksgiving, but here we are. We'll see how that goes for them. All right, Real or Not that I wanted to talk to you about, because we love this segment. Look, Campaign, he's been good off the bench, man. Some people, we haven't seen much of the Knicks free agent signings. So they brought back Precious Achiuwa on a 1-year deal. They brought Campaign on a 1-year deal. Obviously, Landry Shamet got hurt, so we haven't seen him. Campaign's been solid, especially since coming back from injury. I know sometimes he can feel himself, do a little too much. I get that. But Campaign has been a solid signing for the Knicks. 1 year, $3.1 million they gave him. His numbers have been good. Do you think his play as the backup point guard on this team is sustainable?
Yeah, I'm pro having a veteran point guard, if we want to label him that now at this point. As your backup on a contender. Like, that's, to me, just point blank, always a good decision. Campaign is especially a wild card because there's going to be some times where it looks ugly, but coming into this game, he was shooting like 43% from three. And in the times, this is important, in the times where Deuce McBride was out, Campaign stepped up, like over the course of this road trip, for example, right? Like he's somebody, if you play fantasy basketball, he was heavily streamed and you're trying to get him on your waiver wire. You couldn't quite make it work, maybe because a lot of people were running to get Campaign over the last few games, I would say. And, you know, his minutes were limited in this game, but he was efficient again. I don't feel like he's killing you this year. I feel like he's doing a good job for what his role entails. And he's going to be like, if this sustains itself, at least, you know, 80%, 90% of it, or whatever the case may be, like he's going to play in the playoffs. Like this is going to be one of your first two, and with Tom Thibodeau, maybe one of your only two backup guards coming off the bench, you know, assuming that their roster is their roster, which we can't assume because, you know, this team is hungry and it's going to want to field the best team possible. So, you know, trade deadlines in a couple months, but Campaign is actually one of those guys that you can keep on the roster beyond that because you can at least trust them to give you a good 12, 15, if needed, 18, 20, 22 minutes in a key game in like the first round of a playoff series where we may see, you know, maybe not Orlando, but I mean, it's possible that could be the 4 or 5, depending on how the standing shakes out. Like, you know, maybe that's more of a second round series, but like, what if Milwaukee gets it together and Knicks Bucks are the 4 or 5? That's not out of the realm of possibility. If you look at the standings and if you look at just like how tight these teams are, Milwaukee right now, having not gotten anything together, are the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. So they're 9-9 at the time we're recording this. And what if the Knicks play the Bucks? Like Campaign becomes valuable in that series because we know of the defensive questions that Milwaukee is going to have just from a matchup standpoint. If it's the Heat, you know, who are right underneath the Bucks and they're 8-8, like, yeah, that's another series where it's like, all right, they have Terry Rozier, they have Tyler Hero, Campaign can get his against them. Now, on the flip side, they can probably get theirs and other teams will get theirs against Campaign as well. So gift and a curse in that way. But I could see Tom Thibodeau leaning on him as the 7th or 8th man or whatever the case may be in a playoff series. So I think Campaign's strong play is real. And I think that the Knicks quietly like need him more than we think they do.
This is good. There were some people a couple weeks ago. I remember when I was at the Nets game, the 2 Nets games they played, and Campaign did not have a particularly good ending to that game, in which the crowd was groaning a couple of times, some ill-advised shots that he took. But I think he's a solid player. I'm with you, a solid vet. I've been in the locker room a couple of times. He keeps the guys very loose. He's very jokey. He's obviously good friends with Bridges. I'm sure he's going to keep him loose. One thing I would tell people is like, this is the reason I think this Knicks team will be fine. They have a good locker room. I think they're led by Jalen Brunson. I think there's a good culture in that locker room. I think it's a good culture of accountability, but also a balance of those guys having fun and joking with each other. Now, granted, I've been in the Knicks locker room twice this year, and they've been both after win. So everybody's happy after a win. That's just how it is. Everybody's feeling good after a win. Nobody's, you know, that jokey after a loss. But he's one of those guys I do think that's a leader in there in terms of his being vocal and keeping guys loose and that stuff. So salute to Campaign because that's been a great signing. I liked the signing when they made it. I remember when that signing went down. I was in Summer League, and that was a good signing. I was like, that's a solid signing for the Knicks. All right, other thing we have for real or not. We just have 2 today. We talked a little bit about this. Mikal Bridges shooting woes. Is this real? Because now we're getting a little bit of a large sample here with him, particularly on the above the break threes. He just does not look confident in it. He doesn't even look confident stepping into them. They just don't look good. You talked about his true shooting percentage not being good, his efficiency overall being down. Is he just having a bad shooting season? Do you see him shooting this bad the rest of the way? Or are you guys like, all right, man, he's going to figure it out and get back to the mean, get back to the numbers that we've seen him put up throughout his career?
I don't know if it's going to be like this the entire season, but this is where I'm a little concerned. 1, it's about 20 games of this. 2, the 3-point attempt rate is at 45.6, which tells you that almost half of his shots are from 3. So like there is a considerable amount of shots that are just going up from the perimeter. And he's attempted basically about 7 per game just a more simplistic version of that. And he's shooting worst percentage of his career, 31%, basically. It'll be lower than that following this latest effort because he was 1 for 4. So we'll call it 30%. And the reason why I don't think it's going to be like this bad all year long is because he's a career 37% 3-point shooter. But he's not like, I mean, he had one season where it was in the 40s. Otherwise, it's like 36, 37, 38. And I need to check if he's had a start like this, but it just doesn't look great. And also you have the added just concern of like altering his form before the season started. A lot of people freaked out about that. And then it looked good in like the Boston second half, for example, but it's been shaky ever since. So I think he bounces back a little bit. So I don't think the shooting woes to this degree are real, but what is real is like there are shooting woes and he still has to fight out of it. And until we see it, like this is kind of what it is right now. And the advanced numbers aren't great because it's not like he's doing it on a little bit of volume. It's a whole lot of volume. Like it's one of the most, it's the second most amount of threes that he's put up per game in an NBA season so far.
Which is, there's a couple ways of looking at that, right? In that maybe you're encouraged that there's the second most amount of threes that he's putting up because he's not losing confidence necessarily. He's still getting the shots up. And the only way to get out of the slump is to shoot, right? You can't just, you're worried if he's losing the confidence and not taking the quality 3-point shots that are available to him. One thing I will say about Bridges is I don't think his shot selection has been bad. I don't think that's been the problem. I think he's actually been fine on that. He just has not been hitting threes. He gets fantastic looks on these above the break threes. And I wonder how defenses are going to play him if he keeps missing them. That's one of the key things. But the confidence doesn't seem to be waning there, despite tweaking his form, despite shooting the worst of his career. Yeah, go ahead.
You know what's really bad too? And this is the other thing that I need to see bounce back. We have not mentioned this at all as it pertains to Mikal Bridges. And I don't want to seem like we're just frying Mikal Bridges up here, but like, I mean, we're just kind of calling it what it is. The free throw attempt rate he's taken 11 free throws all season long. Now 13 after this game against the Hornets. 1 for 2 today, by the way. So for the season, he's 8 for 13, which isn't great. But the free throw attempt rate, even going into this game, was 4.2, basically, percent. Like the free throw attempt rate is by far the worst of his career. And this is somebody who actually historically, like if you just go through the numbers, he gets to the line. Like last year, it was 4 free throw attempts per game. The year before that, when he first got to Brooklyn, he was getting to the line all the time.
Yeah, and
like,
I think he was getting about 6 times a game.
Yeah, over 6 times a game.
Yeah.
With the Nets specifically. In Phoenix, he wasn't getting there a ton because of the role, but he was getting there more than he is now. He's not really getting to the free throw line at all. And I think this has to be the other piece of this, right? It's like if you're not a threat to drive and draw contact and you're not hitting your jumpers, yeah, people are just going to be content with like, okay, Mikal, knock yourself out. And if you want to get your jumper right, you learn this if you're a New Yorker and you grow up and you're playing in the park. Like the first thing you do when you get to the park is you shoot like layups and free throws. Like you try to get your shot going. You don't just shoot 3-pointers. So he might have to just like figure out ways to get to the free throw line to get his shot right. And then you could see it translate from a 3-point shooting perspective because right now he's not getting to the line at all. And the 3-point shooting is really down, like career low. I don't think those two things are like just separate from each other.
Yeah, and the scary thing is the Knicks offense could be better if they did get to the line. They are among the worst teams in the league in terms of getting to the line, but they are the best free throw shooting team in the league. So when they do get to the line, they're going to make those shots.
Right.
I do think that's a good point with Bridges. He does have to, you'd like to see a little bit more of that with him. It's funny how before the season, people were worried about Josh Hart and his shooting and how he fit in the offense. And I was not worried about that at all because he's an elite cutter. He's also an elite passer. He's a Swiss Army knife of a guy. Josh Hart is not going to shoot the best 3-point shot for you from downtown, but he will take the shot. And he's also an elite finisher. He's one of the best finishers in the game. So when he does it, he will attack. You know, some big buckets he had in the fourth quarter of this game today where he attacked well. There was that one play where he gave it up to Cat, got it back on the back cut and finished with the left hand. That was in about the middle of the fourth quarter. That was a big bucket, and his ability to do that. You're not seeing that from Bridges, which you're right. You saw more of that in Phoenix because you can make an argument that, yes, His role here, nobody's asking him to do what he was doing in Brooklyn. And he was sort of miscast, excuse me, in a way in Brooklyn. But here, as a third or fourth option, I think a lot of people thought he was going to be the clear-cut third option. OG Anunoby would be the clear-cut fourth option, which is why people thought the Knicks may have overpaid for OG Anunoby. However, OG Anunoby does not look like an overpay. But as Brian said earlier in this, Mikal Bridges, I'm not saying it's an overpay yet. I'm just saying the Knicks are not getting what they paid for. That's a little bit of the problem there. And I guess to just answer the question I asked you is like, I think my concern level 10 games ago was at like a 4 with his shooting woes. I'm about like a 6, 7,
yeah.
Kind of there.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned. The positive for me, though, is the attempts aren't going down. He's not losing confidence in that. He attempted 4 threes from downtown today. I'm fine with that. I want to see him shooting through it, but I think he could get going a little bit more if he can get some stuff going at the rim or get to the line, like you said. But we'll see. It's something to keep an eye on, and we'll definitely watch it over the next 2 games before the next time we connect with you guys for a Knicks Weekly Live. First time we did this after a post game. We probably will do it after some more post games where there's some much bigger matchups. I understand the Hornets was not a sexy matchup. We could just call it what it is. We know that it's not a sexy matchup, but we'll do some more after it. Thank you to everybody for checking in. Brian Jordan checking in. Shout out to your daughter once again, playing at the tournament down there, Hoop Fest in Texas. James Morrison, thank you for checking in. Everybody who watched on Twitter or YouTube, we appreciate you. If you missed this, you caught this at the end, you can catch this, the replay, whatever you want to watch it, on demand on YouTube. Also will be up on Spotify, all digital streaming platforms. So check that out there. As I said, New York Got Game, new episode dropping on Monday at noon. We will have the guys from the Bad Weather podcast, Knicks fan and a Nets fan, both joining me in studio to talk about the Knicks and Nets. That should be fun. Also, a lot of other things to look forward to this week in basketball. The Liberty. What are they going to do with the expansion draft coming up in the WNBA? Who are they going to protect? We'll be talking a little bit about that.
I can't wait for that.
That should be fun.
Cannot wait for that.
Brian, I know you're excited about an expansion draft.
Love expansion draft.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Only you will be excited about an expansion draft. Not that I'm not excited about it, but you in particular would be. Thank you to my wonderful producer, Emma Kate Austin, who held it down for Jeff Stransbury today, who is on break for the holiday. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the Black Friday, the rest of the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. He's Brian Fonseca. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll see you guys next Wednesday for Knicks Weekly Live, the edition of New York Got Game. Until then, peace.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.